In the heart of a luxurious house, an old man was treated as a burden. His daughter-in-law snatched away his cane and forbade him from sitting in the living room so he wouldn't dirty it, left him without lunch as punishment, and called him a nuisance in front of the staff. It was his own home, and still he was forced to endure daily contempt. How far can cruelty go when respect for those who most deserve honor is lost? Tell us where you're watching from, like this story if it touches you, and subscribe for more stories. The air conditioner hummed with mechanical precision in the marble kitchen of San Pedro Garza Garcia, Monterrey, creating a dry cold that settled on the skin. The blender whirred loudly, competing with the hard ticking of the wall clock. The scent of chlorine mingled with reheated refried beans, creating an odd combination that permeated the space. Gleaming porcelain plates sat on the polished table. Plates that no one offered to Don Ezekiel, who stood quietly in his worn sweater and sandals, his wooden cane left far away in the corner next to the washing machine that vibrated with constant murmur. Camilla, impeccable in her silk dress and expensive perfume, scrolled through her phone with perfectly manicured nails while barking orders to the housekeeper. "Clean properly, Rosa. I don't want fingerprints on the table." Without even glancing at her father-in-law, she pushed a chair with her foot to move it out of her way. "Could I have my cane back, please?" Ezekiel asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "You don't need it, sir. Walk without making noise," Camilla replied dryly, with a smile that never reached her eyes. The contrast was brutal. The house breathed wealth from every corner: Italian marble countertops, crystal chandeliers catching the morning light, artwork that cost more than most people's annual salary. Yet here was Ezekiel, a father, looking like an intruder in what should have been his sanctuary. From the hallway, the aroma of burnt coffee mixed with the smell of freshly applied floor wax. The tremor in his hands betrayed not cold, but a dignity hanging by threads. Camilla typed something on her phone and muttered, "And no sitting in the living room today. You dirty the cushions." The blender stopped abruptly, leaving a dense silence, as if the house itself was holding its breath, charged with something that begged for justice. Rosa, the domestic worker, caught Ezekiel's eye briefly before looking away. She wanted to help, but her own position was precarious. With 3 children to feed and no other employment prospects, she couldn't risk Camilla's wrath. Still, each day the knot in her stomach grew tighter as she witnessed the quiet cruelty. Ezekiel shuffled toward the small utility room that had become his de facto space when not confined to his bedroom. It was barely larger than a closet, with a small window that looked out onto the garden wall. The room smelled of detergent and damp, but at least there he could sit without scrutiny. Andres, his son, was away on business again. Brilliant and hard-working, he'd built a technology logistics company that now operated across 5 states. The success had allowed him to provide this luxurious home, but he was rarely there to see what happened within its walls. When he was home, Camilla transformed, attentive, respectful, even occasionally warm toward Ezekiel. It was a performance that his son never questioned. "Don Ezekiel," Rosa whispered as she passed the utility room later. "I saved you some pan dulce and coffee." She placed a small plate and cup on the windowsill, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "God bless you, Rosa," he replied, the warmth in his voice genuine. These small acts of kindness were life rafts in his daily sea of indignities. Outside, the garden sprinklers hissed to life, spraying water across the manicured lawn. Ezekiel watched the droplets catch the sunlight, remembering the natural rain on the tin roofs of his childhood home in Michoacan. How far he'd come from those simple days, only to find himself longing for their return. His fingers instinctively sought the rosary in his left pocket, alongside a faded photograph. The beads felt smooth against his calloused fingertips, each one a prayer, a memory, a connection to Maria, his departed wife. The photograph showed Andres in his graduation cap and gown, his smile brilliant with promise. "Grandfather," a small voice broke through his reverie. 8-year-old Mateo stood at the utility room door, clutching a drawing. "Come in, little one." Ezekiel smiled, his face transforming completely. Mateo entered cautiously, always aware of his mother's rules about bothering grandfather. He proudly held up his artwork, a colorful rendering of robots and mountains. "It's beautiful," Ezekiel said, studying the drawing with genuine interest. "Is that a robot climbing the mountain?" "Yes, he's an explorer robot. He discovers new places where people can't go, Mateo explained, his eyes shining with imagination. When I was a boy in Michoacan, Ezekiel began, his voice taking on a storyteller's cadence. I used to climb the hills behind our house. Sometimes I would sit so high up that I could see the rain coming from miles away. Mateo's eyes widened. Really? You could see the rain before it arrived? Yes, like a gray curtain moving across the valley. Ezekiel demonstrated with his hands, creating a visual that made Mateo gasp with delight. Their moment was shattered by Camila's sharp voice. Mateo! What are you doing in there? I've told you not to disturb your grandfather. Mateo jumped back, the drawing crumpling slightly in his grip. I was just showing him my robot, Mother. Your tutor is waiting in the study. Go now, she ordered, her tone leaving no room for argument. As Mateo retreated, casting an apologetic glance back at his grandfather, Camilla turned to Ezekiel. And you should know better than to encourage him to waste time. His education is our priority, not childish stories. The words stung, but Ezekiel merely nodded, his eyes downcast. The temporary warmth Mateo had brought dissipated, leaving the utility room colder than before. Though the gleaming surfaces of the house failed to warm his soul, Ezekiel's simple faith whispered that things could change. God sees what's hidden, he repeated to himself, caressing the rosary and the photo. The world could be harsh, but he would not release his grip on tenderness or patience. He knew dignity resists, even when cornered. Ezekiel was born beneath the vast skies of Michoacan's Sierra, where mountain mists embraced humble homes each morning. The son of campesinos who cultivated life with calloused hands, his earliest memories were filled with the scent of fresh tortillas and ripe avocados picked from their small orchard. Their home was simple, adobe walls that cooled in summer and warmed in winter, a tin roof that sang during rainstorms, and a dirt floor swept clean each morning. What they lacked in possessions, they made up for in dignity and purpose. As a young man, Ezekiel met Maria at a village festival. She wore a blue dress with tiny white flowers, and her laugh reminded him of the clear mountain streams. Within a year, they were married, their dreams bigger than their pockets, but their hearts full of determination. Together, they pushed a bright blue tamale cart through the village streets, Maria's recipes drawing customers from miles around. During quiet moments, they would sit beneath a jacaranda tree and speak of their future. Our child will study, Maria would say, her hand resting on her growing belly. He will read books and know things we never learned. And we will help him reach higher than we ever could, Ezekiel would add, his voice soft but certain. When Andres was born, he became the center of their universe. Even as an infant, his curious eyes seemed to absorb everything, his small hands reaching for the world. As the years passed, Ezekiel took on additional work, learning mechanics from an old man in the village. Soon he was repairing motorcycles, welding metal doors, fixing engines that others had abandoned as hopeless. His hands, once smooth, became tough and scarred, a map of sacrifice that he wore with pride. Every extra peso went into a clay jar labeled Andres' future. Some nights, Ezekiel would come home after 14 hours of work, his back aching and eyes heavy with exhaustion, only to sit at their small table and help his son with homework by lamplight. Maria would place a cup of coffee beside him, her gentle touch on his shoulder, communicating more than words ever could. "Papa, look!" 7-year-old Andres once exclaimed, showing a perfect score on his mathematics test. "The teacher says I'm the best in the class." Ezekiel's chest had swelled with pride. "That's because you work hard and have a good head on your shoulders, Hiko." He ruffled his son's hair. "Keep studying, and you'll go far." That night, Ezekiel added an extra peso to the clay jar, a small contribution to a dream growing larger by the day. When Andres turned 12, tragedy struck. Maria, whose laughter had filled their modest home for so many years, fell ill with pneumonia. The local doctor did what he could, but resources were limited in their remote village. Ezekiel sold his tools, borrowed money, and even attempted to carry her to the hospital in the next town when the roads were flooded. But the fever that burned through her body proved stronger than their love and prayers combined. After Maria was laid to rest beneath a jacaranda tree, where they had once shared their dreams, Ezekiel found himself alone, with a grieving son and a promise that now seemed impossibly heavy. That night, as Andres slept fitfully, Ezekiel carved a walking stick from a fallen peroda branch. With careful precision, he etched a small cross near the handle, a symbol of the faith that would need to sustain them both. "We will keep going," Ezekiel whispered to his sleeping son. "For her, for you, for the promise we made." The years that followed tested their resolve. There were moments when the clay jar remained empty for weeks, when Andres needed new books or shoes that Ezekiel couldn't immediately provide. Yet somehow, through extra hours and occasional help from neighbors, they managed. Ezekiel kept Maria's rosary in his left pocket, alongside a photograph of her smiling face, drawing strength from these tangible connections to her memory. Andres proved to be as dedicated as his parents had hoped. His intelligence, combined with an unrelenting work ethic inherited from his father, earned him scholarships that eased their financial burden. When he graduated from high school at the top of his class, Ezekiel wept openly, clutching his perota cane for support as he stood and applauded. "She sees you," he told Andres that evening. "Your mother sees you from heaven, and she is so proud." University brought new challenges and opportunities. Andres studied computer engineering in Monterrey, living in a tiny apartment shared with 3 other students. Every 2 months, Ezekiel would visit, bringing homemade food and quiet encouragement. He would listen attentively as Andres explained complex technological concepts, nodding as though he understood every word, his pride evident in his eyes, if not in his comprehension. On graduation day, Ezekiel sat in the audience, the perota cane between his knees, as Andres received his diploma with honors. The photograph taken that day, Andres in his cap and gown, smile brilliant with achievement and possibility, became Ezekiel's most treasured possession, joining Maria's rosary in his pocket. "Father, when I succeed, you will never have to worry about anything again," Andres promised as they shared a celebratory meal that evening. Ezekiel believed that promise with the same certainty he believed in the sunrise. Andres' career trajectory proved meteoric. With a combination of technical brilliance and entrepreneurial vision, he founded a technology logistics company that quickly expanded. At 30, he bought his first house in an exclusive neighborhood of Monterrey. At 35, he married Camila, the elegant daughter of a prominent banking family. At 38, he invited his father to leave behind the increasingly empty village and join them in their spacious home. "It's time you rested, Papa," Andres insisted. "You've worked enough for several lifetimes." Ezekiel hesitated, reluctant to leave the home he had shared with Maria, the jacaranda tree under which she rested. Yet the village was changing, friends passing away or moving to be with their own children in cities. Eventually he agreed, packing his few belongings, including the cane he had carved so many years ago, now worn smooth from use. In the new home, Rosa, the domestic worker, became an unexpected ally. Noticing Ezekiel's discomfort with the house's opulence, she would quietly serve him his favorite Mexican sweetbread and warm coffee, sometimes sitting briefly to hear his stories of the village. Despite the material comfort, the warmth of home eluded Ezekiel. Andres traveled frequently for business, leaving him alone with Camila, whose polite facade had quickly eroded once her husband was absent. Yet Ezekiel held on to hope, especially in moments with his grandson Mateo, who seemed hungry for the stories of mountains and rain, of struggle and perseverance. "God sees what is hidden," Ezekiel would remind himself, touching the rosary in his pocket. The world might be hard, but he would not relinquish tenderness or patience. His dignity would endure, even when pushed to the margins of his son's beautiful cold house. The humiliation grew like a shadow stretching across Ezekiel's days, darkening moments that should have held peace in his twilight years. Camilla's cruelty became more refined, evolving beyond sharp words to calculated neglect. She began leaving his meals on the counter, often cold or past their prime, with portions that dwindled like his place in the household. "This food isn't fresh enough for the family," she would say, sliding a plate of leftovers toward him. "But it's still good enough for you. We shouldn't waste anything." The first time it happened, Ezekiel had simply nodded, grateful for any meal. By the 10th time, the pattern was unmistakable, a deliberate reminder of his diminished status. Sometimes the food had a sourness that made his stomach clench, but hunger always won over pride. When Andres called during his business trips, Camila would hover nearby, her presence ensuring Ezekiel's responses remained positive and brief. "Everything is fine here," he would say, the lie bitter on his tongue, but necessary to prevent his son from worrying. Andres had built something important. Ezekiel wouldn't risk becoming the weight that dragged him down. As summer approached, bringing Monterrey's infamous heat, Camilla found new ways to assert control. She began assigning chores that tested his aging body's limits. "The patio needs sweeping," she announced one scorching afternoon when the temperature had climbed past 95 degrees. "Make sure you get all the corners." Ezekiel stood in the unforgiving sun, the broom handle rough against his palms as sweat trickled down his spine. Without his cane for support, each sweep required concentration to maintain balance. After an hour, his hands were raw, small cracks forming in the skin that once wielded tools with confidence. From the air-conditioned kitchen, Camilla watched through the window, occasionally gesturing toward spots he had missed. The physical toll became visible. His clothes, once well-fitted, hung loose on his frame. The belt that secured his pants needed an extra notch. When he caught his reflection in the hallway mirror, a stranger looked back, thinner, more hesitant, eyes carrying a wariness that hadn't been there before. Fear became his constant companion, fear of falling without his cane, fear of displeasing Camilla, fear of becoming an even greater burden. He began to measure his breathing, to time his bathroom visits for when she was occupied elsewhere, to make himself smaller in every possible way. Rosa noticed. During her cleaning duties, she would slip him extra food wrapped in napkins, or help him reach things Camilla had deliberately placed on high shelves. These small kindnesses were lifelines, but even they came shadowed with anxiety. Discovery could cost Rosa her job, and she had 3 children depending on her salary. "Don Ezekiel," she whispered one afternoon, "you should tell Senor Andres what's happening." Ezekiel shook his head. "My son has important work. I don't want to be a problem." "But this isn't right," Rosa insisted, her voice barely audible. "The way she treats you—" "God sees everything," he interrupted gently. "That's enough for me." But divine witness wasn't enough to prevent what came next. One evening, as Ezekiel was slowly making his way from the utility room to his bedroom, he overheard Camilla speaking on the phone, her voice hushed but clear in the quiet house. "It's becoming impossible to manage him," she was saying. "He's slow, he's needy, and frankly, he's bringing down the tone of the house. Yes, I've looked into options. There's a facility on the outskirts of town, very discreet, reasonable monthly rates. Andres wouldn't have to know the details. We'll say it's for his health, that he needs specialized care." The words floated like knives in the air. Ezekiel pressed himself against the wall, his heart hammering painfully against his ribs. A nursing home. She wanted to send him away, to erase him from their lives as though he were nothing more than an inconvenient piece of furniture. "We'll move him out next month," Camilla continued. "I've already spoken to the director. Yes, they can take him on short notice. Andres will be in Singapore. It's the perfect timing." That night, sleep eluded Ezekiel. He lay awake, listening to the house's nocturnal symphony, the tick of the hallway clock, the hum of the refrigerator motor, the occasional creak of settling foundations. Each sound marked the passage of time in a home that no longer welcomed him. The rosary beads moved through his fingers, a familiar comfort that couldn't fully dispel his dread. Around 3 a.m, he heard footsteps in the hallway. Holding his breath, he feared Camilla might be coming to deliver some new humiliation. Instead, the soft sound of suppressed sobbing reached his ears. Carefully, he rose and peered through the crack of his door. Rosa stood in the hallway, a broken plate at her feet. Her shoulders shook with silent tears as she knelt to gather the pieces. Earlier that evening, Ezekiel had heard Camilla's sharp rebuke, an unnecessary shove that had caused Rosa to drop the expensive china. Now, in the darkness, the woman wept not just for a broken plate, but for a broken spirit, for the cruelty she witnessed daily and felt powerless to stop. Ezekiel wanted to comfort her, but knew his intervention would only make things worse for them both. He closed his door silently, adding Rosa's tears to the burden weighing on his heart. The following dawn brought little relief. As sunlight crept across his simple room, the smallest in the house, tucked away near the laundry area, Ezekiel found his hands trembling, not from age but from anticipation of the day's indignities. He wasn't the only one affected by the growing shadow in the house. Mateo, always perceptive despite his young age, had begun to notice the discrepancy between his mother's public persona and her private treatment of his grandfather. When Andres was home, Camila played the role of dutiful daughter-in-law, helping Ezekiel to his seat, asking if he needed anything, even occasionally touching his shoulder with feigned affection. When Andres left, the mask dropped with alarming speed. That night, Mateo woke thirsty. Making his way downstairs for a glass of water, he paused on the landing when he spotted his grandfather sitting alone in the dark kitchen. Ezekiel's hand moved through empty air, searching for the cane that should have been beside him, but wasn't. From another room came the sound of a door slamming, followed by his mother's voice. "Parasito!" The Spanish word hung in the air, its meaning clear even to a child. Mateo retreated to his bedroom, his heart racing with an emotion he couldn't fully name, a mixture of confusion, shame, and the first stirrings of righteous anger. Something was deeply wrong in his home, and though he couldn't articulate it fully, he felt the wrongness in his bones. The next morning, as Ezekiel struggled to butter, his toast without assistance, his hands shaking more than usual, Mateo approached him cautiously. "Grandfather," he whispered, "where is your cane?" Ezekiel looked up, startled by the direct question. I seem to have misplaced it," he lied, unwilling to involve his grandson in adult conflicts. Mateo's eyes, so like Andres's, held a wisdom beyond his years. "I'll help you look for it," he offered, but the arrival of his tutor prevented further conversation. As Mateo left for his lessons, something small but significant had shifted in the house's atmosphere. A child had seen, a worker had wept, and in the space between what was spoken and what remained unspoken, the truth gathered strength, waiting for its moment to emerge into the light. Friday arrived with unexpected consequences. Andres was scheduled to return from Querétaro on Monday, but a canceled meeting altered his plans. The house was unprepared for his early arrival, having settled into the rhythm of his absence, a rhythm that allowed Camilla's true nature to emerge without restraint. He entered quietly, using his key rather than ringing the bell, hoping to surprise his family with small gifts tucked in his briefcase. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, illuminating motes of dust dancing in the air. The house felt strangely still, its usual pristine appearance slightly disheveled, as if caught in an unguarded moment. In the living room, Andres noticed something unusual behind the sofa, the corner of a wooden object partially concealed. Curious, he moved closer and felt his stomach tighten when he recognized his father's hand-carved cane, the one made from peroda wood with the small cross near the handle. Why would it be hidden here, deliberately tucked away where his father couldn't access it? As he retrieved the cane, a soft shuffling sound drew his attention to the hallway. Ezekiel stood there, one hand braced against the wall for support, his thin frame even more diminished than Andres remembered from just 2 weeks ago. There was a plate of half-eaten rice on the floor beside him, as if he'd been eating standing up. "Dad, what are you doing? Where's your cane?" Andres asked, his voice cracking slightly as an uncomfortable suspicion began to form. Ezekiel froze, his eyes widening with surprise and something else, fear. "Andres, you're home early." He attempted a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I was just getting some air." Andres crossed the room, still holding the cane. "I found this behind the sofa, hidden." The word hung between them, heavy with implication. "Dad, what's going on here?" Before Ezekiel could answer, Rosa appeared from the kitchen, her face pale but determined. She wiped her hands nervously on her apron, seeming to struggle with an internal decision. Finally, she stepped forward. "Señor Andres, there is something you should see." Her voice trembled, but her resolve held firm. Pulling out her cell phone, she hesitated, only a moment before pressing play on a recording. Camilla's voice filled the space between them, crystal clear. "Don't be so dramatic, old man. The cane makes marks on my floors, and you move too slowly with it. Either learn to walk properly or stay in your room." Andre's face drained of color as the recording continued, revealing a pattern of verbal abuse he'd never witnessed. There was his wife's voice, calling his father parasite and burden, threatening to solve the problem permanently, once Andres was away in Singapore next month. "When did you record this?" he asked Rosa, his voice barely controlled. "Last Tuesday, senor, and Wednesday." Rosa's hands shook, but she stood her ground. "I have more, many more days." "She's telling the truth, Dad." A small voice came from the staircase. Mateo stood on the landing, his young face solemn with the weight of adult concerns. "Mom takes grandfather's cane. She makes him clean the patio when it's really hot. She calls him names when she thinks I can't hear. Andres looked from his son to his father, the reality of what had been happening in his home during his absences crashing over him like an icy wave. He'd been blind, willfully perhaps, to the signs. The way his father had grown thinner, quieter, the way Camilla's attentiveness to Ezekiel seemed to switch on only in his presence. "Dad," he said softly, approaching Ezekiel and gently leading him to a chair. "Why didn't you tell me?" Ezekiel's eyes welled with tears. He tried to blink away. "You worked so hard to build something important. I didn't want to be the reason it fell apart." His weathered hand clutched at the rosary in his pocket. "Besides, I thought, maybe I was being too sensitive, too old-fashioned for this modern house." The sound of the front door opening silenced them all. Camilla entered, perfect as always in a tailored dress, her composure a practiced art. Her momentary surprise at seeing Andres quickly transformed into a warm smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Darling, what a wonderful surprise." She moved to embrace him, but stopped short when she registered his expression and the gathering in the living room. Her eyes narrowed when she spotted the cane in his hand. "What's going on?" "That's what I'd like to know," Andres replied, his voice tight. He held up the cell phone. "Rosa has been recording how you speak to my father when I'm not here." "Andres, don't be ridiculous," Camilla scoffed, though a flicker of unease crossed her face. "Rosa, what nonsense have you been telling him? If you're unhappy with your wages, there are better ways to address it than making up stories." "They're not stories," Andres said quietly. He pressed play, and Camilla's voice filled the room again. "The nursing home director says they can take him with minimal paperwork. By the time you return from Singapore, it will all be arranged. We'll say it's for specialized care he can't get at home." The color drained from Camilla's face. "That's taken completely out of context. Your father needs professional care." "Stop." Andres raised his hand. "Just stop, Camilla." He turned to Rosa. "Thank you for your courage. Please take Mateo upstairs for a while." As Rosa ushered a reluctant Mateo away, Andres knelt beside his father's chair. "I'm so sorry, Dad. I didn't see what was happening right in front of me." "It's not your fault, son," Ezekiel said softly. "It absolutely is." Andres' voice broke. "I should have been more present, more aware." He stood, turning to face Camilla, who had composed herself and now wore an expression of offended dignity. "Andres, your father is becoming difficult to manage. He needs more care than I can provide with everything else I'm responsible for. I was only trying to find a solution." By hiding his cane, by making him stand to eat, by calling him names, each question struck like a physical blow. "I heard it all, Camilla. The recordings go back weeks. You're overreacting. He exaggerates his difficulties for attention. Ask Dr. Menendez. He's in perfect health for his age." Her voice took on a reasonable tone, as if explaining something obvious to a child. "That's enough." Andre's voice was quiet, but carried a finality that silenced the room. "In this house, my father will be treated with dignity. That's non-negotiable." Camilla's mask slipped, revealing the cold calculation beneath. "This house functions because I run it. I manage everything while you're building your precious company. I've created the perfect environment for your success, for Mateo's development. And this is how you repay me? By taking the side of an old man who contributes nothing?" The words hung in the air, revealing the truth more completely than any recording could have. Andres stared at his wife, seeing her clearly perhaps for the first time. The elegant, polished woman he'd married had shown her true character, and it was ugly in its callousness. "The abuse ends today," he said simply. He reached for his phone, his decision made. "I'm calling two people, our family attorney and Dr. Vega, who specializes in geriatric care." "What are you doing?" Camilla demanded, her composure cracking. "First, protecting my father, then deciding what comes next for us." He dialed the number, his voice steady despite the emotion visible in his eyes. "Because this," he gestured to encompass the situation, "this is a line that cannot be uncrossed." By Sunday morning, the house had transformed. Not physically, the marble countertops still gleamed. The art still hung perfectly aligned on walls. The garden remained immaculate, but the emotional atmosphere had shifted fundamentally. Security cameras now monitored common areas, their small red lights blinking silently. Ezekiel's room had been moved from the small space near the laundry to a proper bedroom on the main floor, with windows overlooking the garden and an ensuite bathroom equipped with safety rails. Most significantly, Ezekiel's cane rested within easy reach wherever he sat, and no one dared suggest otherwise. Andres had spent Friday night in a hotel with his father, returning only after arrangements were in place. He moved methodically with the same precision he applied to business challenges, identifying the problem, securing evidence, consulting experts, implementing solutions. By Saturday afternoon, the family lawyer had documented everything and advised on potential elder abuse charges. Dr. Vega had examined Ezekiel, noting mild dehydration and weight loss that required monitoring, but fortunately no lasting physical damage. Camilla had retreated to the guest house, her status in limbo as Andres considered their future. She'd attempted several approaches: tearful apologies, righteous indignation, pragmatic appeals to family stability, but the recordings had left little room for manipulation. The evidence was damning, her own voice betraying the calculated cruelty she'd inflicted when she thought no one of consequence was listening. Now, as sunlight streamed through the dining room windows, Andres called for a family meeting. Rosa was invited to attend, along with Miguel, the gardener who had worked for them for years, and Teresa, Mateo's nanny. Ezekiel sat at Andres' right hand, his posture straighter than it had been in months, the Perota cane resting against his chair. "I've asked you all here because what happens in this house affects everyone," Andres began, his voice steady despite the dark circles under his eyes, "and because the truth needs to be spoken openly." He glanced around the table, making eye contact with each person. "My father was mistreated in this home, not by strangers, but by family. Not in my presence, but in my absence. The responsibility is mine for not seeing what was happening, and I apologize to him and to all of you who witnessed it and felt powerless to intervene." Ezekiel reached over and patted his son's hand. "Hijo, you came home in time. That's what matters." Andres nodded gratefully before continuing. "Today, I'm setting new rules for this household. First and foremost, every person who lives or works here will be treated with dignity. No exceptions, no matter their age, position, or relationship to me." Rosa dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Miguel nodded solemnly. "Second, there will be consequences for what has happened." Andres turned toward the glass doors leading to the guest house, where Camilla could be seen through the window, pacing on the phone. Camilla will not be returning to the main house. She has until the end of the week to make arrangements. A small gasp escaped Teresa, though she quickly composed herself. "What about Mom?" Mateo asked, his young voice trembling slightly. "Where will she go?" Andres knelt beside his son. "Your mother has family in Mexico City. She'll stay with them while we work things out. You'll still see her. Regularly. I promise." He chose his words carefully, aware of the delicate balance between honesty and protecting his child. "But this house needs to be a place where everyone feels safe and respected." Mateo nodded, seemingly relieved rather than distressed. "Will grandfather stay with us?" "Yes," Andres confirmed. "This is his home, too." The meeting continued with practical matters: schedules for Ezekiel's checkups, adjustments to household routines, and an open invitation for staff to report any concerns directly to Andres. Throughout it all, there was a sense of weight lifting, of air becoming easier to breathe. When the others had dispersed to their duties, Camila finally entered the main house, her designer sunglasses hiding her eyes, but not the tight line of her mouth. She glanced at the security cameras and scoffed quietly. "Dramatic as always, Andres. A simple conversation could have resolved this without turning our home into a surveillance state." "Not a conversation, Camila. A reckoning." Andre's voice was calm but immovable. "I've heard the recordings, all of them. I've seen the doctor's report on my father's condition, and I've consulted with our attorney about elder abuse charges." She removed her sunglasses, revealing eyes cold with calculation. "Charges? Don't be absurd. I was managing a difficult situation while you were building your precious empire." "Managing?" Ezekiel spoke up, surprising them both. His voice was soft but steady. "Is that what you call hiding my cane, making me stand to eat, planning to send me away like unwanted furniture?" Camilla's gaze flickered toward him with barely disguised contempt. "You've always played the victim well, Don Ezekiel, but we both know you exaggerate your difficulties when it suits you. That's enough." Andre stepped between them. The facts speak for themselves, and they tell a clear story. I've made my decision. He handed her an envelope. The terms are fair, more than fair, considering the circumstances. Sign them, and we can all move forward with some dignity. She took the envelope without opening it, her composure never cracking. This is a mistake you'll regret, Andres. We built this life together. No, he corrected gently. I built it with the foundation my parents laid through their sacrifices. You decorated the surface. He gestured toward the door. Your things will be delivered to your sister's address in Mexico City. Mateo will visit on weekends until a more permanent arrangement can be established. For a moment, something like genuine emotion flashed across Camilla's face. Not remorse, but a flicker of recognition that she had miscalculated badly. Then the mask returned, perfect and impenetrable. You'll hear from my attorney. She turned on her heel and walked out, the sound of the door closing behind her, somehow both definitive and anticlimactic. In the silence that followed, Ezekiel reached for his son's hand. I'm sorry it came to this. Andres shook his head. I'm not. The truth needed to come out. He squeezed his father's hand. This house will be a home again. I promise. Later that afternoon, as Ezekiel sat in the garden, enjoying the simple pleasure of fresh air without fear of criticism, Mateo approached with a drawing in hand. Without hesitation, the boy settled beside his grandfather on the bench, their shoulders touching comfortably. I made this for you, he said, passing over a colorful illustration of two figures, one tall, one shorter, standing beside what appeared to be a mountain with a robot perched on top. It's beautiful, Ezekiel said, genuinely touched. Is this us? Yes, we're exploring together, like in your stories. Mateo pointed to the robot, and he's there to help carry things so you don't get tired. Ezekiel felt his throat tighten with emotion. That's very thoughtful of you, mijo. Grandfather, Mateo said hesitantly, I'm sorry I didn't tell Dad sooner about how Mom was treating you. I was scared. You have nothing to apologize for, Ezekiel assured him, putting his arm around the boy's shoulders. You were brave when it mattered most. He smiled softly. And now, we can look forward, not back. From the kitchen window, Andres watched the interaction, his heart both heavy and hopeful. The damage had been done, but healing had begun. The path forward wouldn't be easy. Divorce proceedings, custody arrangements, the inevitable gossip among their social circle. But for the first time in too long, their house felt honest. And in that honesty lay the potential for something genuine to grow. Days later, the legal machinery that Andres had set in motion began yielding results. Judge Mercedes Olivares reviewed the evidence and issued a restraining order protecting Ezekiel. The ruling came with additional measures. Camila was ordered to complete 6 months of community service at a public nursing home in Monterrey, under supervision and with mandatory training on dignified treatment of the elderly. The paperwork lay on the dining room table, its formal language translating human suffering into legal terms. Andres read through it twice before setting it aside, a mixture of satisfaction and sadness in his expression. Is it enough? Rosa asked quietly as she placed a cup of coffee beside him. In the days since the confrontation, her posture had straightened, her voice finding strength now that fear no longer pressed it down. It's a start, Andres replied. The elder abuse case could have gone further, but Dad didn't want that. He said justice shouldn't destroy, only correct. He smiled faintly. He's a better man than I am. In the charity foundation where Camila had once held a prestigious board position, more for social standing than genuine concern, news of her behavior had spread quickly. A public statement was issued distancing the organization from her, immediate suspension from her role, and a clear condemnation of elder abuse in any form. The society pages that had once featured her elegant outfits at charity galas now whispered of her disgrace, a fall from grace as swift as it was merited. These public consequences served their purpose, not as revenge but as a message to the community. What happens behind closed doors matters, and those without voice deserve protection. It was stern medicine, but necessary for both the individual and the society that had enabled her behavior. For Ezekiel, the physical recovery came more quickly than expected. With proper nutrition, respect, and the return of his independence, his body began to reclaim what neglect had stolen. Dr. Vega arranged for a physiotherapist to visit 3 times weekly, helping to strengthen muscles weakened by months of restricted movement. "Excellent progress, Don Ezekiel," the young therapist remarked during their 4th session. "Your balance is improving significantly." Ezekiel smiled, leaning comfortably on his Perota cane. "My body remembers how to be strong. It just needed permission." The emotional healing proved more complex. Some nights, Ezekiel still woke from dreams where he searched endlessly for his cane, his voice too weak to call for help. On those nights, he would touch the rosary beads and whisper prayers until his breathing steadied and the shadows retreated. Mateo became an unexpected source of healing. The boy would sit with his grandfather in the garden each afternoon, eager to hear stories of Michoacan or to share his own day's adventures. Sometimes they simply sat in companionable silence, Ezekiel carving small wooden figures, while Mateo drew elaborate pictures of their imagined expeditions. "Grandfather," Mateo asked one such afternoon, "are you still sad?" Ezekiel considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but sadness doesn't mean the day has no joy in it." Mateo nodded, absorbing this wisdom. "I miss Mom sometimes, but then I remember how she made you sad, and I get confused." "It's okay to love someone and not like what they did," Ezekiel explained gently. "Your mother made mistakes, serious ones, but that doesn't erase the good parts of her." He tapped his chest. "The heart is big enough to hold complicated feelings." This simple philosophy guided the household as it found its new rhythm. Andres reorganized his work schedule to be home more often, delegating responsibilities and conducting meetings via video conference rather than constant travel. Dinner became a family affair, with Ezekiel sometimes sharing recipes from Maria's repertoire that Rosa delighted in recreating. The house itself seemed to exhale, releasing the tension it had held in its walls. Spaces that had once been showcases became lived in. A book left open on a side table, a chess game mid-play between grandfather and grandson, clay pots of herbs from Michoacan brightening the kitchen windowsill. On a Sunday morning in late spring, Andres suggested they attend Mass together at the parish of Fatima. Ezekiel dressed carefully in a new guayabera shirt his son had given him, the Perota cane polished for the occasion. As they walked from the car to the church steps, several neighbors greeted them warmly, including some who had previously only acknowledged Camila with nods of deference. "Don Ezekiel, it's wonderful to see you out and about," said Senora Valdez, who lived 3 houses down. "My mother asked about your tamale recipe last week. Perhaps you could share it sometime?" "It would be my pleasure," he replied, genuine warmth in his voice. Inside the church, sunlight filtered through stained glass, casting jewel-toned patterns across the worn pews. The familiar scent of candles and incense wrapped around Ezekiel like an old friend. As the service concluded and parishioners filed out into the sunlight, Andres placed his hand on his father's shoulder. "Can we talk for a moment?" he asked, gesturing toward an empty bench in the church garden. They sat together, surrounded by the scent of jasmine and the distant sounds of Sunday life. Children laughing, car doors closing, the church bells marking the hour. Andres seemed to struggle for words, unusual for a man whose business success relied partly on his articulate confidence. "I need to ask your forgiveness, Dad," he finally said, his voice low. "I didn't see what was happening in my own home. I failed to protect you." Ezekiel studied his son's face, the lines of worry that hadn't been there when Andres was a university student full of dreams, the flecks of gray now appearing at his temples, the eyes that carried both strength and a new humility. "There's nothing to forgive, Hijo," he said softly. "You looked when it mattered. Many never do. I should have seen sooner. But you saw." Ezekiel's interruption was gentle but firm. "When the moment came, you chose justice and love. That's all a father can ask of his son." Andres blinked rapidly, emotion tightening his throat. "In the business world, I can spot a problem from a mile away. But in my own home," he shook his head, "I won't be blind again." "Then we've both learned something valuable." Ezekiel patted his son's hand. "And learning keeps us young." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the garden around them alive with spring growth, new leaves unfurling, flowers opening to the sun, life persisting despite winter's memory. "I've been thinking," Andres said finally, "about what you told Mateo, that it's possible to love someone and still not accept their actions. Ezekiel nodded. It's one of life's hardest lessons. With Camila, Andres sighed. I'm not sure I can find that forgiveness yet. Maybe ever. Forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting, Ezekiel said. It's not erasing consequences. Sometimes it's simply refusing to carry the weight of anger anymore. As they walked back to the car, Ezekiel's steps were steady, his cane tapping a gentle rhythm on the pavement. Neighbors greeted them no longer with the deference of wealth, but with the respect granted to men of character. In these small acknowledgments lay a different kind of richness, the wealth of being seen for one's true worth. Back home, Rosa had prepared a special lunch. The dining table, once a showcase for Camila's entertaining, now held steaming dishes of comfort food. Pozole rojo, fresh tortillas, sliced avocados drizzled with lime. The sense of childhood and home filled the air, creating an invisible bridge between Ezekiel's past in Michoacan and this present moment. A feast fit for kings, Andres declared as they gathered around the table. Or for family, Ezekiel corrected gently. As they bowed their heads for grace, Ezekiel felt the weight of Mariah's rosary in his pocket, the smooth beads warmed by proximity to his heart. Beside it rested the photograph of Andres at graduation, now joined by a new image, Andres, Mateo, and himself, 3 generations standing together in the garden, faces open with genuine smiles. In that moment, surrounded by the family that remained and the peace hard won, Ezekiel understood that dignity, once restored, grows stronger for having been tested. Like a bone that heals more solid at the point of fracture, the spirit becomes more resilient where it has been broken and mended with love. In this house, Andres had promised, you will never be alone again. Then we have already won, Ezekiel had replied. The wind moved through the open windows, stirring the curtains, and peace settled in. Because when family delivers justice, dignity comes home to stay. Dignity is not negotiable.